We begin with a walk down memory lane. So it's now 8 a.m. and time for the meeting to start. We all file into the conference room. We are a newly assembled team of 12. There are 9 on the client side, 3 on the consulting side, including me. The tone, the mood, it's a little awkward, as it often is when you're just getting to know one another. The environment, in a word, I'll label it depressing. Tiny little windowless room, kind of dirty, grungy. But in spite of the vibe and in spite of my surroundings, I'm actually feeling very good about myself. I have a really nice leather portfolio that I place in front of me on the desk, a very expensive pen to go along with it, stack of brand new business cards. And I may not know naval shipyards, but I know stuff. I'm 23. And then, wham, all of my confidence and bravado, it evaporates in an instant because the lead on the client side decides to open up the meeting, and here's what he said. And he is, by the way, a tad more seasoned than I am. He says, well, guess we ought to do some of that introduction stuff. Let's have everybody say how long you've been on the yard and what do you bring into this party? I'm curious, by a show of hands, any of you in the room ever had one of those moments in life when you wish the ground would open up and swallow you whole? Ever? Anybody ever in your life? This is one of those moments for me. A little background as to why. It's my first brand new real job as a consultant. I've been on the job for approximately 2 weeks. I'm working for an IT consulting firm. It's my first client, my first project, my first ever client meeting, and in fact, it's my first time on a shipyard ever in my life. Anyone in the room ever been on or near a shipyard, by a show of hands? Quite a lot. So give me some words that you would use. Just shout out words you would use to describe the environment. We have friends in the room who are coming from mysterious places. That's not just in my head, right? You hear that too?
Who knew?
All right, as I was saying, words you would use.
I did, sorry. I'm leaving tonight, so I'll take it with. It followed me.
I am like so beyond disoriented right now, I don't even know what to do with myself.
Male dominated.
It's male dominated. Oh yeah, thank you for helping me get back on track. Words you would use to describe the environment in a shipyard.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Round of applause.
How did we get here?
Male dominated.
I loved it. That's good.
That was good.
They're blogs. There's also some loyal followings that will
I'd probably say there's a boat there.
There's a boat, yeah.
She's the opportunity to be here today. To make this.
You can just sit down and listen in.
Yeah, I mean, really.
And I know that I'm going to do my best to educate, and obviously that's why you guys invited me to come here. But I suppose that there's value.
Maybe I should.
At least like to hear all of it.
And just go ahead and start out that way.
It's an AV box.
A hallmark of a leader who knows how to lead with trust is knowing how to improvise. So I'm feeling tested in this moment.
That didn't do it.
It didn't. We've just gotten a reprieve. Okay.
A brief one.
A brief one. So as I was saying.
Okay. Yes. How many of you
Yes.
have either just recently
Maybe I should just go with what she's saying.
or about to make some changes with your compensation strategy, philosophy?
Anybody making changes in your org strategy or philosophy?
It's a good thing in this big.
Apparently she has more influence than you do.
Apparently. Clearly you should all exit and go over there, wherever she is. Is it here?
A lot of heavy equipment. And every time you think
Thank
it's safe.
you. I know. I'm afraid to talk. All right, so we have male dominated, we have dirty, we have boats, we have heavy equipment. So you can probably imagine me and my, suited up, fully accessorized self amidst this environment. You can imagine my internal state. I'm excited, I'm also really nervous, and I'm really eager to make a great first impression on everyone with whom I come in contact, not unlike today. The best laid plans. So you can imagine what it's like for me to hear that I'm to answer the following two questions. How long have you been on the yard, and what do you bring into the party? Because these are the last two questions I want to answer, period, let alone publicly, since the truth of the matter is I've been on the yard for, 13 and a half minutes, and what am I bringing? So, my palms start to sweat, and my stomach starts to churn. And then I have an idea. I think to myself, I know what I'm going to do. I will orchestrate it so that I go last. Buy myself a little bit of time. Turns out to be the first and certainly not the last time I make a really bad choice in the middle of a client meeting, because by the time it is my turn to go, I learn that every single member of the client side of the team, all of whom happen to be male, by the way, have been working on the shipyard longer than I have been alive. True story. So there I am. Spotlight on me, nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. And the question is, in this moment of truth, what should I do? And that's my question to all of you. In this moment of truth, what should I do? And we're going to answer this question by way of a poll. I'm going to give you 4 possible options. Hear all 4, and then we'll see which one you like best. Option A, I should leave the room to answer an urgent phone call. Option B, I should take a deep breath, let the cat out of the bag, go ahead and answer both questions honestly, directly, chips fall where they may. Option C, I should focus my response on the things that I learned at college that I'm pretty sure are going to be relevant to the project, maybe without disclosing the source. Why is it relevant? I know what I know. But I at least want to do something to establish my credibility in this very important first meeting. And option D is I should find some subtle, nuanced, consultative way to redirect attention to the client. Something along the lines of, enough about me, let's talk about you. So, how many of you think I should choose option A by a quick show of hands? How many are the most tempted by option A? How many like option B? There are a lot of hands going up in the room. People who like option C, raise your hand if you're going to go. Good, we've got some hands going up, a few. And who like option D as the best? Okay, good, we've got a couple hands for that. Well, here's what happened. Here's what I did. I chose option C. I pretended like I hadn't heard the question about how long I'd been on the yard, skipped over it entirely, and proceeded to regale them with everything that I could pull from the semester prior from my information technology consulting classes. I talked to them about how I knew Jordan DeMarco data modeling and IDEF modeling and this and that and the other. And you can get an idea of what was happening. The longer I spoke, the harder I tried to look knowledgeable and valuable, the more naive and inexperienced I proved myself to be. Now, looking back in that moment of truth, what I wish I had chosen was option B. I wish I had simply answered both questions directly and honestly, because there are things that I know and understand now about what it really takes to build trust, especially in first interactions, and in fact in all interactions, what it really takes. Things I know now that I didn't understand then. For example, I know that experience and expertise is only one way to build credibility. Honesty is another. Now I know that the thing that we are the most afraid to say is often precisely what will build the most trust. And now I know that the relationship between trust building and risk taking is that they are inextricably intertwined. You do not get one without the other. Now, in that moment, I chose option C for the plain and simple reason that I was uncertain and afraid. And when I look back at the nearly 21 years that I've been in and around the consulting industry now, I realize I have spent an inordinate amount of time uncertain and afraid. Simply unsure of what to say or what to do at a particular moment. What is the right thing? And I have no doubt that every single one of you in this room can relate, regardless of your background, your experience, your role. you can relate to the pressure we all sometimes feel, whether the pressure is real or the pressure is imaginary, to please our stakeholders, to have the right answer, to look good in a moment of truth. All very real, very understandable human vulnerabilities. The problem with these real, understandable human vulnerabilities that we all deal with is that they come with a cost. For example, when we don't manage them effectively, when we succumb to them, we waste precious time and energy trying to be someone we're not. We miss opportunities all over the place to really connect with people in deep and meaningful ways because our focus is all over here instead of being out there. We compromise our ability to be influential for the very same reason. And we fail to consistently distinguish ourselves as a safe haven for tough issues, which is the essence of what it means to be a trusted advisor. And there is nowhere that this is more true than when we're working in the C-suite. Time is short, visibility is high, and more often than not, our opportunities to really distinguish ourselves, to really stand apart, to really make a difference, come few and far between. In short, we suffer in the way that I suffered that day in the shipyard. Our relationships suffer and our results suffer. Now, amidst all this suffering, there's a little bit of good news. And the good news is that what it takes to be trustworthy and what it takes to be influential can be learned. It is not something that some of us are born with and others are not. In fact, it is something that can be mastered. And the investment that is required to learn and to master is well worth the payoff. So let's spend a minute or two talking about that payoff. Anyone remember the game show Family Feud? I'm dating myself by asking the question. And if you don't remember it, it's okay. We're going to do a simplified version in the spirit of Family Feud. Here's what I'd like you to do. In a moment, I'm going to cue you to work with your row. And if you're standing in the back of the room, you can just kind of divide in half. Half of you will be in one group, half of you will be in another. And I'd like you to answer the following question. What are the top 5 benefits of having trust in the workplace? What are the top 5 benefits of trust in the workplace? You have all of 90 seconds to work with your row to come up with your answer. The top 5 benefits of trust in the workplace. On your marks, get set, go. All right, that's time. Now, I just learned something very interesting and unexpected about this group. I just learned that you all are very resourceful. Because you have access to this deck, the non-animated version, the one that has all the answers. So some of you actually came up with every single one of the correct answers. Very, very well done. Some might call it cheating. I'm going to call it resourceful. All right, so survey says, right, in the spirit of, what was his name? Richard Dawson. In the spirit of Richard Dawson. Survey says, number 5. Number 5 benefit of trust in the workplace, creativity and innovation. Trust brings freedom. It's a critical element of having creativity and innovation in the workplace. So for those who weren't looking at the slide deck, how many of you had something like this from your row? Excellent. Okay, we've got a couple. Survey says number 4, information sharing. So with freedom comes a readiness and a willingness to share, disclose, explore, discover. For those of you who weren't looking at the answers, how many of you came up with something like this? Okay, good. Survey says number 3, leverage. With information sharing comes the ability to make the best use of the resources that you have. Leverage. So those of you who weren't resourceful, who had something kind of like this, leverage or like it, excellent, good job. Number 2, productivity. Woohoo, yay! Everything moves faster with trust. I saw some hands in the back of the room. Who got productivity? Okay, good. And survey says number 1. Woohoo, yay! They're so excited. Engagement. David Zinger, somebody you may be familiar with, an employee engagement expert, he ties engagement to what he calls authentic connection. And when you have trust in the workplace, authentic connection really is possible. Now, be ready to give those kisses, Gary. So for those, was there anyone who wasn't using the answer deck who got like all 5 of these right or pretty close to right? Any team? How about 4? Who got 4? All right, Gary, can you give some kisses out? Excellent. Now, here's the question. While Gary's giving his kisses, I'm going to move on. The question becomes, how do we get these results consistently and sustainably? And in particular, how do we have this in our C-level relationships? And we're going to answer that question in 3 ways. We've got 3 things we're going to focus on. One is, first of all, we've got to start with, what does it really take to be trustworthy? What does that mean exactly? Secondly, what does it really take to be influential? And thirdly, what does it really take to make a habit of trust? So this is our agenda or our roadmap, if you will. Now, toward the question of what it really takes to be trustworthy, let's talk about that for a moment. Oh, and by the way, before we do that, we've got a number of giveaways for you, not just kisses, not just Gary's kisses. We've got a couple of things. You've got resources available on SHRM website. You've also got a landing page that you can go to on one of my websites. It's called getrealnow.com, and if you enter /SHRM Atlanta, there's a zip file that you can download that has a bunch of stuff in it, including it's got a copy of this deck if you have trouble getting it the other ways. It's got the Trusted Advisor Field Book was written with every chapter has at least 1 worksheet. You don't have to buy the book. You can go get all the worksheets in both PDF and Word format from this zip file that's available here. There's an ebook on working with the C-suite and building trust in the C-suite, and a couple of other things that we've packaged up for you. So that's available. We also, by the way, we're going to do a special offer just before we wrap up today, but you got to stay for the whole session to hear about it. So we got something else coming. Now, toward the subject of what it really takes to be trustworthy, it turns out that if you try to answer this question by looking up the word trust in the dictionary, you're going to be wasting your time. It's one of those squishy, ambiguous terms like love. It means all kinds of different things to all kinds of people. There are all sorts of shades of gray in the dictionary definitions. And by the way, it also happens to be contextual. You trust your dog with your life, but not with your lunch. So do you or don't you trust your dog? Well, the answer is it depends. And my colleague and co-author, Charlie Green, who's one of the original authors of the book, The Trusted Advisor, that was published about a dozen years ago, he set out to bring clarity to the ambiguity around this topic, and he created something called the trust equation. And it is literally, it's an equation with 4 variables. And Gary and I are going to share with you a little bit about each of those variables right now. So the first variable in the trust equation is C for credibility. This is very much what was at stake for me that moment, that day in the shipyard. Was I going to build it or was I going to kill it based on how I answered those 2 questions, how long you've been on the yard and what are you bringing to the party? So the aspect of credibility that most of us zero in on, like with laser focus, is our knowledge, our experience, our expertise. And it turns out that there is at least one other thing that is as important, if not more important, than credentials, quals, experience, and that's honesty. Because paradoxically, when we are willing to tell the truth, even if, especially if that truth doesn't necessarily make us look good, like I'm brand new, or I don't know, or I screwed up, it turns out that that actually builds more trust with others in that moment than any form or creative variation of spinning an answer that we could come up with. The thing that we are the most afraid to say is usually precisely what will build the most trust. So credibility maps to credentials, yes, and truthfulness or honesty as well. And there's some particular ways, Gary, that credibility plays out in the world of an HR practitioner.
Okay, there are essentially 3 practical applications to this when it comes to credibility in the HR profession. And the first is knowing the field of HR. HR has so many moving pieces to it and so many competencies that we have to have. And it's important that we know something about each of those competencies, even though we might not specialize in them. So for example, SHRM has a competency model that they've developed. And it talks about each of these areas of expertise and the proficiencies that we should have if we're new in HR, if we're in kind of mid-career, senior level, or executive level. So credibility factor number 1 is knowing the field. The second is only speak as an authority when you are one. 2 words that will ring true with everyone in the room. Inflated resumes. Anyone ever see one? Right. You know, as HR people, we're not exempt from that temptation. Because we aspire to greater influence in the organization, we want to be trusted, we want to be seen as competent, and it's all too tempting at times to exaggerate or at least imply that our level of expertise is really larger than it is. I remember the first time that I was asked to build a variable compensation program for a retail wholesale organization. I was at least a little tempted to let silence imply that I knew what I was doing. But the truth is, I'd never done that before. So one of the ways we build credibility is being honest about what we know and what we're expert in, and then speaking that honestly to our C-level people. And third, provide evidence of an informed opinion. Probably everyone in the room has excelled in one particular facet or another of human resources. If you have great experience in performance management, for example, there will be a time when it's appropriate to share that, so your C-level partners know where you've been and what you've done. Maybe you've had some experiments that didn't turn out so well. The honesty about what you've learned from those experiences builds credibility. Maybe you've read a great article on safety or benefits, and the conversation around the C table is safety or benefits. Share what you know. It's part of your story, and it builds credibility that you're learned and that you're continuing to learn in your profession.
My co-presenter, by the way, did not get a round of applause when we started. Can we have a round of applause for Gary Jones? Truly a pleasure to be doing this with you today.
Likewise.
Moving on to the next variable, reliability. So I'm going to present this by presenting a situation, a scenario. I'm going to give you the facts and give you some options of how to respond, and then we'll do that poll show of hands thing again. Imagine this situation. You have promised something to a client, let's say an internal stakeholder, by close of business. And it's late in the day and you realize there is no way you're going to get it done by the time you wrap up, but you will be able to deliver by 8 a.m. the following morning, and your client typically gets in at 9. And the question is, what do you do? So here are 4 possible options. And let's say I'm going to, not what do you do, I'm going to say what should you do. This is the question, what should you do? Because there's often a difference between what we know to do and what we actually do. What should you do? So look, option A is you have bigger fish to fry. There are more egregious things you can do. You're going to get it in by the time they arrive in the office. You decide not to worry about it. Option B is that you deliver it at 8 in the morning and at least acknowledge that it's an expanded definition of close of business, some sort of acknowledgement. Option C is that before you wrap up for the day, you just send a quick message to re-promise for 8 a.m. tomorrow. And option D is that you send a quick message as you're wrapping up to your colleague saying, hey, when are you going to get that thing delivered already, with a copy to your client, otherwise known as the throwing the colleague under the bus option. So by a show of hands, who likes option A? Who likes B? Who likes C? And anyone going for D? Anyone tempted by D? So we had 100% of the hands in the room, and there were a lot of hands in this room going up for option C. C, basically, this whole situation actually tees us up to talk about reliability, which is fundamentally about actions. Credibility is about our words. Reliability is about our actions. And the essential definition of reliability, or the way to demonstrate it or not, is the extent to which the things that you promise and the things that you do align or not. And if they don't align, it's the extent to which you are committed to getting in communication about it immediately. Which is why the most trustworthy response in the previous example is what all of you chose option C. Now, remember what I said, just because we know we should do it doesn't mean that we do it. I'm as guilty as anybody in this room of not consistently practicing choosing option C for a whole host of reasons.
Once in a while.
Once in a while, yeah, it happens. Okay, good. Now, here's the thing about reliability. There are certainly far worse things that you could do than not taking the time to send the note and repromise for 8 a.m. tomorrow. It's certainly from a building trust standpoint. You could do something way more egregious. And here's the reason that I call out this example and I want to bring our attention to it, is because I think there's something to be said for proving that you are someone who can be counted on, not just for the big stuff, but for the little stuff too. And the paradox of reliability is that if you get in communication about it when you fail to deliver on your promises, and we all do or we all will fail to deliver on our promises for all kinds of reasons, many of which are often outside of our control. The paradox of it is when you get in communication about that, you actually at least maintain, if not increase, your reliability score in the face of not delivering on something. By the way, what I would invite you to do as we're talking through these 4 variables is to bring to mind a C-level executive with whom you would like to have a better relationship. There's some potential for improving the level of trust. There's some gap to close. Maybe there's a breakdown in the relationship. The gap could be small, the gap could be big. Maybe it's a relationship that doesn't exist and you want one and you don't have it. Bring to mind a particular person. And as we're working through these variables, think about, well, how am I doing on the credibility front? How am I doing on the reliability front? And toward that end, some specific examples in the world of an HR practitioner would include...
It's what we live every day. You have to handle the small things well, the little things well. For example, payroll, benefits. Those are terrifically important in the eyes of those who are receiving the paycheck and receiving the benefits. If we continually make mistakes in those small, tactical, day-to-day aspects of HR, it will be really hard to gain the sensibility and the attention of our C-level colleagues when we're asking for something larger of more strategic influence and trust. Coupled with that is to be sure that we deliver on C-suite promises every time. So if we're promising a compensation analysis by Wednesday at noon to our boss, let's have it Wednesday at noon. And let's have it correct, accurate, let's have it in good presentation form. That's the goal. But we all know, as Andrea said, the goal doesn't always happen. Sometimes we fail to scope out the project and it takes longer than we thought. There are lots of reasons why that could happen. Or maybe it's right on time in every step through the scope of the project, but guess what? HR is a world of interruptions. And so things happen that impinge on the ability we have to deliver on time. So when that happens, since none of us is perfect, as Andrea said, pick up the phone, walk down the hall, and talk with that executive about what the realistic deliverable date now is and why. The perception of reliability is built on every individual transaction that we have at the tactical level. And every interaction that we have with a C-level person is really an audition for leadership. So we need to handle those well. And come to think of it, why wouldn't we treat all of our stakeholders like executives? Why wouldn't we want to do everything we can to deliver on our promises and commitments, regardless of the level of that person in the organization? One thing for sure, in organizations, people talk. And you and I spend a lot of time every day dealing with the repercussions of people talking in the organization, don't we? Well, guess what? They're talking about us too. And the perception that they are sharing throughout the organization of our ability to be trusted, to be deemed reliable, goes a long ways as that conversation filters up to the C-suite.
Third variable, third situation. Imagine that your CEO, Paul, is 10 minutes late to a one-on-one meeting that he has with you, which, by the way, is highly unusual. At the beginning of the meeting, he mentions in passing that he's dealing with issues at home, and throughout the meeting, he seems distracted. The question is, what should you do? 4 options. Option A, maybe the best and most respectful thing to do is to stay focused on the agenda. Help him get back on track. Option B, make a mental note that maybe there's something going on, and maybe a little bit later, pull him to the side or outside the course of the meeting where there isn't an agenda pressing, you might make an inquiry. Just check in and make sure he's okay. Option C, slightly different flavor. You make the mental note and you take the extra step of asking your team if there's something they can do this week to be extra helpful, extra productive. And option D is that you actually pause to make an observation during the meeting, something along the lines of, Paul, you seem distracted. So who likes option A? Who likes B? Okay, good. We've got a few hands for that. Who likes C? And anyone going for D? All right, so we have a lot of hands in the room going for D. This scenario tees us up to talk about intimacy, which is a deliberately provocative word to use in a business setting. Intimacy fundamentally relates to safety. So with credibility, we have words. With reliability, we have actions. With intimacy, we have safety. There are many paths to intimacy. I'm going to focus on 3 primary ones. Discretion, which I assume I don't have to explain to an HR audience. The next 2 are empathy and risk-taking. Discretion, empathy, and risk-taking. The riskiest option in this scenario is option D, to actually pause and make an observation. It is why it is the most trustworthy option to take. Now here's the thing. How Paul responds actually doesn't matter that much. It's risky because you don't know how Paul is going to respond. Maybe it'll feel like an intrusion. Maybe he'll start to cry, or you never know what's going to happen if you open that up. And by the way, I don't recommend you push. If he responds in a distant or aloof way, he doesn't want to talk about it, no problem. How he responds actually matters less than the gesture that you make by taking the risk to pause to make the observation. And it's important how you do it and the tone and the language that you choose. I don't recommend you say, dude, what's up? You notice I said, Paul, you seem distracted, and then just be quiet and see where he takes it from there. Because what you do when you do that is you communicate not only that you're paying attention and that you care, which B and C, those options cover, you communicate right then, right now, that you're paying attention and that you care, and that you are opening the door as someone who can be, that someone else can talk to about anything. That safe haven for tough issues. Intimacy, by the way, is a critical piece of trusted advisorship because it's about safety, and being a trusted advisor is safe haven for tough issues. Now, I also mentioned empathy as a third pathway to intimacy. One of the hardest things, I think, for us human beings to do is to really get in somebody else's world, to see things through their eyes, to imagine what it's like to be them, rather than being caught up in what we see and what it's like to be us, what we need, what we want. And in particular, when you're dealing with the C-suite, I think this is critically, critically important. Now, here's what I'd like you to do. Remember that C-level executive you brought to mind a few minutes ago, the person you want to have a better or even have a relationship with. I'm going to give you 1 minute. It's about 20 to 30 seconds per person to turn to 1 or 2 people sitting next to you. So if you're in a row of 5, you're going to have a group of 3 and a group of 2. And I just want you to say out loud some words that would describe that executive's world. What is it like to be him or her on an everyday basis? On your marks, get set, go. That's time. Let's get back together. Get ready with those kisses. I want to hear 5 words from 5 different people. Give me a word that would describe your CXO's world. Busy. Excellent. Number 2. Yes, in the back. Overwhelming. What else?
Conflicted.
Conflicted. What was that in the back? Lightning pace. And I'm going to make Gary get his exercise. We've got here in the front of the room, the very front corner, stressful. Here are the words that I came up with in the conversations that I've had and in the course of working with various C-level executives. Here's what it's like. It's complex. There's a lot of complex decision making. Resource constraints, always dealing with resource constraints. Data overload, similar to overwhelm that I heard you all say. Loneliness. There's a reason they say it is lonely at the top. And the sphere of influence for a CXO is huge. It's huge. So if we want to know how to be trustworthy and how to be influential in the C-suite, it starts with getting really clear about what it's like to be in the C-suite and aligning and adapting accordingly.
So one of the things that means, there you are, you get two since you gave a risky one. One of the things that means is that when we go into our CXO's office for a 30-minute meeting about the project that to us is the most burning issue, the best issue, the biggest way to influence the organization all quarter, maybe all year. To us, it's the largest thing on the horizon. To our CXO, it's probably just one of many large things on the horizon. And it's important that we understand that. So we've looked at credibility, reliability, intimacy. There's a fourth factor in the trust equation, and it may be the most important one of all. Let's illustrate it with some examples and see if you can find one that relates to you, or maybe more. Imagine me, Chief Human Resources Officer. What does that mean? Finally, I'll get the respect. Finally, I'll have the influence at the table. Finally, people will hear what I have to say. Oh, and that office is larger. And I get my own admin. I'll get to hang out with the big guys. I'll get to have lunch with them. People will see how important I am. We'll play golf and tennis together, and everyone will want to be like me. And then there's the money, right? There's the money. Let's be honest. So finally, I can take that vacation I've really wanted to take instead of going to see my sister. Finally, I can buy the sports car I wanted, or renovate the kitchen, or heck, I might just go ahead and buy the next house. A raise? Wait, and a raise means greater bonus potential. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I think we've all been tempted there a time or two. I have worked so hard to get this human resource management system. I'm going to push it through no matter what. Everyone else around the table pushes their projects through. I'm pushing this one through. Doesn't matter what my colleagues say they want. This one is mine, and it's my turn. And then finally, have you ever done such a good job introducing an idea to the organization that after about 30 minutes of discussion, other people thought it was theirs? And all of a sudden, were you tempted to say, wait, that was my idea. I'm the one that saved the company $100,000 or made the company $100,000. That's my credit. It goes to me. And then here's one that's kind of interesting. We all have some self-talk with ourselves. Are we really ready for that step? Are we as smart as we think we are? Can we really be influential at that next level? Surely we ask ourselves that question from time to time. And the opposite of it is, when are people ever going to notice? I'm here with a cape. I'm saving the day. All right, let me ask you a question. Show of hands, please. How many of you in the room have felt unappreciated, undervalued in your role in HR? Show of hands. All right, you are not alone. I essentially asked the same question on a LinkedIn forum And I can just tell you, I had dozens and dozens of postings to it. So we all want to feel appreciated and valued. So these are the ones that we flashed up, the little thought bubbles. Could you identify with one or more? One of the most important factors of trust is this fourth variable. And it's the one that lives inside of us. And it can derail us in our attempt to gain influence and trust in an organization. It's not that any of these things are wrong. It's about the motive behind those desires and that self-talk. Andrea?
And therefore, that variable is self-orientation. Remember those very understandable human vulnerabilities I alluded to when I opened? This is where they live. This is where they come into play. Self-orientation is fundamentally about your focus, which has a lot to do with what your motives are. Are your motives out there and about them, or are your motives in here and about you? So now you see the whole equation, and you can see the goal is to maximize your score on the three variables in the numerator. We want high credibility, high reliability, high intimacy, and we want to keep our score as low as possible in terms of self-orientation. And you notice, by the way, if it's 0, the formula implodes. It's not possible for it to be 0, and it's also not the same as being selfless. The goal is not to be selfless. Martyrdom, by the way, is a peculiar form of high self-orientation. The goal is to stay really focused out there on making a difference, doing whatever it takes to make a difference. And that is, by the way, why Gary and I say, if you're trying to get a seat at the table, stop. Because trying to get a seat at the table in and of itself is usually about high self-orientation. Try to make a difference instead. Do whatever it takes. Now, those words, it's so simple to say, and it's anything but easy to do. Anything but easy to do. So, we've covered now what it really takes to be trustworthy. We have focused on 4 specific variables: credibility, reliability, intimacy, and low self-orientation. You've brought to mind a particular executive with whom you would like to have a better relationship. You may be seeing an opportunity or two mapped to these variables. I'm going to give you the 3-minute lesson now on what it takes to be influential. And in reality, 3 minutes is really about all we need to get it. Who in the room has ever had the experience of giving really great advice only to have it not be taken? We should probably all have our hands up if we're practicing honesty and truthfulness, right? And the question is, why does that happen? So we're going to peel that back. So here's why it happens. First of all, to understand that, we have to look at what is generally our operating model for how we think others think and come to make decisions. Here it is. Generally speaking, we think it's a fairly simple process of accumulating facts, applying some kind of logic, and then coming up with the answer, the truth, the recommendation. And in reality, human beings don't work that way. C-level executives don't work that way. To really understand how people think and come to make decisions, how they come to be influenced, we've got to get out of the rational world of left brain business thinking and into the world of psychology. And we turn to experts like Dr. Robert Cialdini. He's a psychologist with the University of Arizona, wrote a pretty well-known book called Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. He's been studying this subject for 35 years. In the course of his study, came up with 6 principles of influence, what it really takes to be influential. The one that we're going to focus on that plays out the most, in my opinion, in the business of advice giving. And when you think about it in HR, that's a lot of what you're doing. You're giving advice to C-level executives and other stakeholders in the organization. The principle that plays out the most that we will focus on is reciprocity, simply defined as the tendency to return a favor. Now, this plays out a lot of different ways in business, and narrowing in even further, the aspect we're going to focus on specifically is listening. What I mean by that is reciprocity plays out in listening when you give someone the experience of really being heard, and they have a tendency to return the favor of listening to you. Conversely, if you don't give someone the experience of being heard, they are not likely to return the favor of listening to you. Which means that for those of you who had your hands up, that you've given pretty good advice only to have it not be taken, the bad news insight I have for you is that more often than not, it's because you didn't do a good enough job of listening. Because paradoxically, being influential has very little to do with talking and everything to do with listening. Now, there is a specific kind of listening that matters because it isn't enough to just listen. What we have to do is give someone the experience of being heard. And those two are sometimes very different things. Sometimes there is a big gap between listening and giving the experience of being heard. We need to narrow that gap, and we narrow that gap by listening in two realms or two dimensions. There's the rational realm and the non-rational realm. You all know this perfectly well. You got to listen for the facts, the data, the history, the information. And you've also got to listen for the mood, the tone, the emotions. What's the subtext of what people are saying beyond the words that are coming out of their mouth? And the way we give someone an experience of being heard, simply put, is we paraphrase the rational and we empathize with the non-rational. Paraphrase and empathize, paraphrase and empathize. And in today's business world, there is a dearth of paraphrasing and empathizing. We are moving so fast, we are working so hard to get to the right answer. And this may seem like a hypocritical recommendation in the C-suite when time is short. And I promise you, if you spend your time paraphrasing and empathizing, not only will you save time because you'll get to the right recommendations faster and those recommendations will be adopted, you will also give yourself the opportunity of greater time because those C-level executives, they're going to want more of you. They're going to want more time with you rather than less. Now, you notice the word empathize maps back to one of the four variables of the trust equation. Which one of the four? Intimacy. Intimacy. Excellent. Give her a kiss, please, Gary. Intimacy. It's key. And this is how we earn the right to be right. It is not enough to be right. We have to earn the right to be right. My colleague and co-author Charlie Green has an expression I love. I wish I could lay claim to having created it myself. He says, being right is vastly overrated. Being right too soon just pisses people off. We have to earn the right to be right. Now, we've talked about what it really takes to be trustworthy, what it really takes to be influential. I want to spend a minute talking about what it really takes to make a habit of trust. Aristotle is reported to have said, "We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, therefore, is not an act, but a habit." The key to trust and influence in the C-suite and anywhere is, first of all, recognizing what's required, what's the recipe, and then practicing diligently. It's really all it takes. Even some of you out there who say, I'm just not a very empathetic person. And by the way, a lot of people in HR struggle with empathy. You would think that in the field of HR, we're the most empathetic people in the world, and it's not necessarily the case. You're as business-oriented and results-oriented as the best of them. So what does it really take all it takes is practice to close the gap. And I want to give you a couple. We've got 7 tips to give you, things that you might consider practicing with your C-level executives. And if you don't like any of the 7, pick whatever is present for you. Having heard the 4 variables of the trust equation, go where your score is lowest and practice something there. Practice something there. So tip number 7 is to watch the CXO's watch, not yours. Pay attention to his or her attitude towards time, not just the clock on the wall, but the attitude towards time. If you're halfway through your negotiated meeting time and you see that she's fidgety or distracted, say something about it. Hey, is this really on point for you? How could we be spending our time that would be more valuable? Should we adjourn and come back to this later? That's tip number 7. Tip number 6 is to listen with empathy. Earn the right to be right. Earn the privilege to be heard. Earn the privilege to be the person who makes a difference for that C-level executive.
And number 5 is focus. Take 5 slides into the room, not 50. The headlines become the presentation. And if your C-level persons want more detail, they'll ask you and welcome you to stay long enough to give it. Or you can leave behind a handout that has that level of detail. The next principle is speak plainly and honestly. Unfortunately, when people get to the C-level, a number of people who speak with them don't give them the real scoop. They couch things in phrases that they think the CXO wants to hear. They're not always candid. Sometimes they have hidden agendas. And so if the CXO can learn that you will speak plainly and honestly without a hidden agenda, you will become a very trusted advisor to that person. And then last, prepare to your normal level of excellence. We all prepare when we go in those rooms. We want to look good, we want to be on, we want to be exactly what we need to be. That preparation is important. But the most important thing in the room is focusing on the relationship with that CXO. And so prepare, but be ready to leave all of that preparation behind if in the moment the CXO needs something else from you.
Number 2 on our top 7 countdown is to be willing to think out loud. Be willing to share the formation of your thoughts, not just your thoughts. That's a risky thing to do. It's a risky thing to do with a possibility of great reward, because in doing that, it's a very high intimacy and very low self-orientation. You actually demonstrate your commitment to collaboration and authenticity over your commitment to looking good, being prepared, always having the right answer. And number 1 on our top 7 list is minding your mindset, noticing where is your focus. Is your focus on getting a seat at the table, or is your focus on making a difference? Is your focus on doing what's right? Helping the CXO make the best decision for him or her in that moment, regardless of the personal implications to you. The special offer that I mentioned, I invite you all to join us on a call in 30 days. Because what I'm challenging you with is to right now, today, begin your 30-day experiment. You could choose anything from the top 7 list or anything else that you want to try as a way of building your trust muscles over the next 30 days. And then you'll join us, if you'd like, for a call. We're going to check in and see how you did. We're going to celebrate your victories and talk through the challenges that you experienced. The call will be 30 minutes. No strings attached, you don't have to sign your next child away in order to do this. You just have to give us your name and your email address. That's all we need from you. So we're not quite finished, but as we adjourn and you leave the room, what I need you to do is leave a business card on the back table, or their sign-up sheets if you don't have any cards left or you want to save them for something else. Just give us your name and your email so that we can coordinate with you and share with you how you can either get on the call, or if you can't make the time that gets selected, get access to the recording. We will record the call for you. I promise you, if you commit to just making one small change over the next 30 days, you will be astounded. It's what's possible for you to shift in your relationships with your C-level executives between now and then. 20 years ago, I was alone, feeling very alone on a shipyard, faced with the 2 questions I least wanted to answer. How long have you been on the yard, and what do you bring into the party? And my shipyard buddies, all 9 of them, they were wise enough and experienced enough to see right through me. They were also wise enough and experienced enough to cut me a little bit of slack. They were very gracious with me. And in fact, we developed over the 6 intensive months that we worked together a pretty extraordinary relationship with some pretty extraordinary results. And it got better and better and better the more comfortable I got just being myself. Being who I was and who I wasn't, keeping my self-orientation low, keeping my intimacy high. And you all have the possibility, you know everything that you need to know right now about what it takes to be trustworthy, what it takes to be influential, what it takes to make a habit of trust. The only question remaining is, how will you choose to set yourself apart?